Good day and welcome to Grammar Series number 4, Complex Sentence. This video is brought to you by the English Test Prep Providers and your teacher, Anthony, a licensed professional teacher in the Philippines. So if you haven't watched the Grammar Series 1, 2, and 3, I want you to watch all of them. Because if you can't understand the complex sentence, that's the time that you're going to look back to those 3 grammar series because it will give you and establish the basics of the sentence. So without any further ado, let's get started. In this session, we are going to learn one of the 4 types of sentences, the complex sentence. In our last video, I taught you about the compound sentence, and in this time, I will teach you the complex sentence. A complex sentence has one independent clause joined with a dependent clause. Remember, an independent clause is a sentence that can stand alone. So, another feature of complex sentence, it does not only contain a complete sentence, but rather it is also joined with a dependent clause. So what is the difference between dependent clause to the independent clause? Independent clause, just like what I've mentioned earlier, is a complete sentence. Thus, a dependent clause is a sentence that cannot stand alone. So it means this clause depends or really have to depend on the complete sentence because dependent clause cannot stand alone as a sentence. It does need a complete sentence or independent sentence. Now, aside from that, dependent clause or clauses often start with a subordinator. So in the compound sentence, coordinators, complex sentence, subordinators. Now, what are those subordinators? Here are examples of the subordinators where independent clauses start with. Since, because, before, after, although, when, until, while, and others. So here are the examples of the subordinators. Remember, we use subordinators to start a dependent clause. So it means to start an incomplete sentence. Okay, let me introduce you to the different examples of complex sentences. Let's read the first one. After saying goodbye to everyone, Brian got into the taxi and went to the airport. Okay, what do you think is the subordinator that we use in the sentence? Very good. It's after. Okay, let's try to dissect this complex sentence. Okay, Brian got into the taxi and went to the airport is our independent clause. So it means this sentence can stand alone. How about after saying goodbye to everyone? Yes, definitely this is our dependent clause. It is a clause that depends on to the complete sentence. After saying goodbye to everyone doesn't convey any meaning at all. But you have to keep in mind that after writing the dependent clause, it requires comma before you are going to write the complete sentence. Now, you could also transpose complex sentence. You can begin with Brian got into the taxi and went to the airport after saying goodbye to everyone. So that is the beauty of the complex structure. You can reverse the structure. Independent clause, then dependent clause, or dependent clause, then the independent clause. Moving forward. Okay, examples of complex structures or complex sentences. They censored the movie because they didn't want to offend anyone. So what do you think is our clauses here? The first is we're going to look for the independent. They censored the movie. They censored the movie is a complete sentence, so it can stand alone. Because they didn't want to offend anyone, it does not convey meaning, so it cannot stand as a sentence. Thus, it is our dependent clause. And aside from that, aside from it cannot stand as a sentence, it is introduced by a subordinator because. Next, look at that sumptuous food. Since it was an early release day, we went to Long Wong's and ate 50 hot wings. Okay, now what is our independent clause? Okay. Alright, so let's try to have the dependent clause first. So the dependent clause is since it was an early release day, so it cannot stand alone. Remember? So in this case, this complex sentence is introduced by a subordinator since it was early release day and punctuated with a period after the clause. Hence, we went to Long Wong's and ate 50 hot wings is our independent clause. Alright. So you could, just like what I mentioned, you could transpose this. We went to Long Wong's and ate 50 hot wings since it was an early release day. So it's up to you. You can transpose or reverse the structure. Now let's have practice. So I have here four numbers. Okay, so probably you can prepare a pen and paper and number your paper 1 to 4. So in our practice, I want you to write down the dependent clause and circle the subordinator. Okay? Write down the dependent clause and circle the subordinator. So dependent clause is a clause that cannot stand as a sentence. It does not have a meaning, or the meaning is incomplete. So next is you have to circle the subordinator. So in the dependent clause, you have to circle the subordinator. Okay, so you can pause this video and try to write your answers. After you answer, you can just comment down below so that we could check your work. Okay, let's move on to identifying the dependent clause first. So in number 1, after driving for 3 hours, they arrive at their destination. So one of the signposts that we have noticed to determine that it is a dependent clause is because of the subordinator. So since it is introduced or started with a subordinator and a comma at the end, definitely this is our dependent clause. After driving for 3 hours is not, the meaning is incomplete, so this is our dependent clause. And our subordinator is after. Next, they never stop on the way there because they wanted to be early. Okay, so our dependent clause is because they wanted to be early. Our subordinator is because. Number 3, although they drove together, it was not a pleasant drive. Although they drove together is our dependent clause, and it is introduced with a subordinator, although. Lastly, we decided to write together since we were going to the same meeting. So our dependent clause is since we were going to the same meeting, and our subordinator is since. Okay, so how many scores did you get? If you got 4, excellent. But if you got 3, it's fine. But if you got 1 or nothing, I want you to rewatch our initial discussion about the complex sentence. Do you guys have, or do you have questions? So if you have, you can reach us through our email or through our Facebook. So I'm going to give you our Facebook address and email address, as well as our website address. So let's recap. So we learned about complex sentence. Complex sentence has a dependent clause and an independent clause. Independent clause is a clause that can stand alone or a complete sentence, while dependent clause is a clause that cannot stand alone and the meaning is incomplete. It requires independent clause or a complete sentence so that it will complete the sentence. And lastly, subordinators. Subordinators are the words that we often use to start a dependent clause. So examples are while, since, although, despite, before, after, and others. So if you have questions, you can reach us through our Facebook or email us at ieltsfreelancetutors@gmail.com. Website. Our website is etprepproviders.wixsite.com/Philippines. So if you are someone who is preparing for an IELTS exam and you really want to improve your sentence construction, so click a thumbs up and try to, of course, subscribe to this channel for more grammar series. And of course, we are planning to make some videos about those English exams aside from IELTS, PTE, TOEFL, OET, CELPIP, and CAEL test. So for you to keep yourself posted with our videos, so please subscribe and click the notification bell so that you could get the first and fresh videos that we're going to post. Okay, of course, if you're also looking for trainers, we could also render a help for you. And we are also wishing to be part of your journey. So we offer online reviews or tutorials for IELTS, TOEFL, PTE Academic, and others. So we are making sure that we are certified and trained by the respective providers of those English proficiency tests. And we have lots of passers to name of the records will show. Okay, so that's all for today. So thank you for watching this video, and we hope for you to see you next time for our last series, the compound complex sentence. Thank you. See you next time.